Hello, everyone. This is Mike Bouchard. Welcome to week one. I figured I would provide you with some feedback, advice, support, whatever you want to call it, about how to tackle this week, especially the assignment. It's a very good assignment. It's very, very interesting and very relevant to what we may encounter out in the workplace. Um, first and foremost, about change management, and I talk about this a little bit in the overview for the week, is that when we implement change, unless there's some secret reason why we can't communicate why the change is needed, we need to establish a sense of urgency with employees. In other words, why we're doing this, and then to make sure they understand how it's going to benefit the organization, how it's going to benefit them, and ultimately what the consequences are for the organization or whomever if the changes aren't implemented. There are certain situations where you can't do that. It just needs to happen. Maybe you can't reveal certain information right away. As a manager, what I do is say, hey, I need you to do X, Y, and Z. I'll explain why later as soon as I can. I let employees know that. Like, I'll always come clean with what's going on, unless there's something I can't talk about right now. But um, that's typically I'm able to communicate that sense of urgency. There could be a situation that I would call rare where I couldn't do that, but it's possible that could happen. So that's one issue I see here is that sometimes organizations or leaders in organizations implement change and they don't really explain why. Or my favorite was a lot of changes are coming and they walk off. I'm like, well, that's great. You want to explain what they are? So it's important to be very transparent and to communicate with all the stakeholders involved so they can embrace it. Because no matter what, there's going to be times where employees are resistant, even in the midst of chaos, as I like to say. Some will accept the current chaos rather than the risk of future unknown. So, going back again, I'm big on communicating that sense of urgency and benefits and the consequences for not implementing those changes. It doesn't have to be all negative either. It could be, well, if we don't implement these changes, we're going to lose 20% of our revenue. Okay, whatever it may be. So it's important to be transparent in that regard. Those who continue to be resistant, I've also experienced situations where leaders will focus more time on those who are resisting rather than those who are supporting the change. And I have a video in here for all of you. I think in the overview, it's called The Lone Nut. And it talks about how important it is to gather that movement, as it were, that transition, that change through its followers. So my recommendation is, yeah, you do have to address those who are resistant to change, but at the same time, don't ignore those who are actually supporting you. Through time, there'll be those who will get on board after a little while. It might just take them a little bit of time. Once they see others, supporting and embracing the change, they're possibly more likely to embrace that change. So, although it's important to address resistance, at the same time, we also have to understand that we should also look at those who are our change agents, as they like to call them in many forums there. So, support the change agents. After a while, those who are resistant may be more likely than not to embrace that change. So it's a psychological pull in many respects. So if you focus too much on the negativity, create more of it. We focus on positivity and embracing change, we'll create more of that. So that's just based on my experience uh, dealing with change management issues over the years. So I want to talk a little bit about this assignment. So what I see here is a very complex but very relevant situation for your week one assignment. So I started looking at the exit interviews, and I'm not going to give you the answer, of course, but I do want to support you along the way. And the exit interviews are really indicative if you have high percentage in certain areas, oh, we have some major problems. Like, for instance, retirement, that's natural attrition. I'm not worried about that. We start getting into the training issue, relationship with management, career opportunities or lack thereof, then there you go. I mean, they're the primary problems. I can see that now. And I'm very used to doing these, by the way. So the comments are important too. I like to review the comments. There's some positive comments here. I like that. But, you take a look at the turnover rate and the problems here and the fact that they're not meeting results. I'm really curious about the less positive comments. I mean, you're going to get some, but these seem substantial. There's a lot. So, and they are very telling. So, for instance, there's definitely a disconnect or a silo between Singapore and the home base here. And it looks like there's issues where any problems aren't being addressed. It looks like vagueness. Any suggestions for improvement look like they're being put by the wayside. I'm reviewing this now. Inconsistent ways of working, communication from the top. So yes, these are all like really, really, really good symptoms of a larger problem. Now, when it comes down to it, and again, this is based on my experience, if there's a problems in an organization, there's not much someone says, oh, it's the employees, I can't find good help or anything like that. You as the manager, we as the manager are basically responsible for everything that happens. In this case, it looks like the target's the vice president of the organization. So essentially, yeah, you see all these problems. Well, you're responsible for handling them. This is an HR issue too. I'd be looking at this from an HR perspective. You continue to see high turnover and results are not obtained. And it seems clear there's a huge disconnect between leadership and management and the silo effect, as it were, between this organization and their partners out in Singapore. So the silo effect, just in case you don't know what that means, I like to think of it as like a farm. So you have a silo that's filled up with chicken feed. There's another one they fill up with, I don't know, whatever, corn, and none of them touch each other. So they're separated. Organizations can operate in a silo, and none of the components really know how their behavior or their work impacts others. So that's kind of a good picture of what the silo effect is. So I went over here and looked at, let me see, the employee engagement survey. This is more telling to me, based on my experience in employee engagement surveys. I didn't see questions, as I recall, where they asked, who's about to leave within 6 months to a year. I'd recommend doing that. Give you a clear picture of how the turnover rate may change or increase or whatever in that assessment, but that's okay. So it looks like to me there is an issue with that engagement, and it makes sense. Employee engagement surveys are much more telling than what they call employee satisfaction surveys, because you'll gauge the satisfaction working for an organization with an engagement survey, but engagement has more to do with how are things connection-wise between leadership and employees and leadership. And again, I put that responsibility on leadership. So I see this is an issue here. A lot of people haven't been promoted. Oh, wait, they do. My fault. I plan to be working for this organization in 1 year. Yeah, I'd probably assess 6 months and 1 year, but that's okay. Prefer not to answer 27.5% of the respondents. So let's look at that right there, right? 7.5 respondents that prefer not to answer. I would take that as a no, to be honest with you. At least assume it is. So that's about, if I did my math right, about 39% of their staff. So we'll just estimate around 40% of their staff are curious about leaving within the year. So it all makes sense to me, lack of promotion and all that. Now, what gets deeper here is the self evaluations. I don't mind self evaluations, and you can get a lot of good details out of them. But quite frankly, how honest are we? You know, and I'd be afraid to rate myself too low or too high personally. So I would just go with probably the middle range. Usually is what I'll do, because I don't want to sound like I didn't do anything, and I also don't want to think that them to think that I feel I walk on water, because I don't. So in that situation, it is kind of telling, as far as the self evaluations, and it's important for you to look at them. But I wouldn't gauge them as high as, say, the turnover rate as far as the exit interviews. And the bigger piece, in my perspective anyway, is the employee engagement survey. So there is a piece that talks about how many of them are going to vote with their feet or wish to vote with their feet and leave within a year. I would just probably do 6 months to a year. But again, that's minor. That's not a problem. So what else? Looks like the on the job training might be needed here. And let me think of it, whatever. So it looks like the teams, the coworkers, they work well together. But let's see what else is here. Only 36% actually agreed that leaders focus on creating a positive team atmosphere. That's a little dangerous there. And it looks like the middle manager is open, honest, and transparent, say 70% in agreement. I like that. So it seems the issue has to do with senior management. So let me just put this aside a second and talk about that. I've been in situations where the top management seem to be separated from what's going on in the front lines and all that. So it's more of a hierarchy, and they place themselves kind of separate. And it could be not on purpose, they're just doing it. But you can't do that with problems like this. You need to be out there a bit and talk to the employees, engaging with the employees. And this clearly isn't happening here. So I can see that symptom of a larger problem. So what I want you to think about for this assignment basically is really concentrate on employee engagement. That's an issue. And I would add a couple pieces as far as Singapore. It's very, very important. And it's not really stated in here that I could see, but to add value to your research paper, I would probably look into the cultural differences between, say, United States of America and Singapore. There's going to be a disconnect culturally, not maybe linguistically too, as far as the way they do business. And geography, as far as time zones, that could be an issue too. So to add value to your work, what I would do is also focus on cultural implications and what's been done or what has not been done. And there's evidence to suggest that there's challenges collaborating with Singapore, possibly creating that additional silo effect. So I would definitely do that and get some practice researching that, because there are many individuals out there, if they're not already, will be working for a multinational corporation. And to me, that would mean that basically they really, really, really should make sure that there's some type of training to build that bridge between the employees in Singapore and domestically, and to learn each other's cultures, to find ways to communicate better. But if communication is not happening from the senior management, then that's going to be a very difficult situation. So I'm curious of what you think, and you're welcome to chat with me about it if you like. Email, call, whatever. What you would do with this vice president. People are voting with their feet. They're leaving, right? And as we see here, this is a problem. They're not producing results. So I'm curious. Oh, your stake on that. what I found in situations of high turnover rates and low employee engagement, sometimes it can be the job, the nature of the job for the turnover, but the engagement piece is really telling. So I'm thinking that the first place I would look is senior leadership and to identify that problem. And there could be all kinds of consequences, if you know what I mean. So think about that. When I was a trainer at this hospital, I was asked to look into the turnover rate for dietary. This hospital ran, it was a long-term care hospital, state operated, and the turnover rate was ridiculous. The pay was really low. That was one factor. But the issue when it came down to it was the leader, and it was clear as a bell. And it was a 5-page report. I could just say it's the leader. Like, the end. It's clear as a bell. And anyway, when employees don't feel engaged in the work they do, they don't have clarity, they don't have that transparency. Collaborating overseas with another country is a significant change too. So you just can't slap it on there and expect things to work. It takes a lot of effort to transition these two different cultures and, organizational culture, but also culture based on location, and mesh it into a stronger global culture where they collaborate properly. So I would be interested in what you think about the business culture in Singapore versus the business culture in the United States. I'm going to take a look at a couple things too, just because I'm curious. I'm really, really curious. And this is a great assignment to really get you thinking at the graduate level about how to solve these complex problems, because I'm deep into this myself. So I'm going to have fun reading your papers, and I'm just very, very curious. Yeah. So, and I don't mean to minimize, by the way, the self-assessments. Please do look at them, because I mean, you'll get some information from them, but I cannot say that 100% that they'll tell all as far as employee performance. The bigger issue has to do, I believe, at this point, or maybe you do too, the employee engagement piece, and the turnover rate seems to have a connection to engagement issues. So I can't wait to read your papers. I'm here if you need help. You know to contact me. Thank you very much, and I'll see you on the boards.